I'm Amanda Hunt, Director of Education and Senior Curator of Programs. I am thrilled tonight to welcome Larry Bell, who needs very little introduction to this Sculpture Plaza stage, as well as our new, by way of old colleague, Mia Locks, who's just joined us again at MOCA as Senior Curator and Head of New Initiatives. These two incredible sculptures behind me, Carol and David, again, thank you for bringing this here. We have the privilege and the pleasure of looking over them every day from our offices. It's been incredible to see this come together, but really, Larry, thank you for your vision and genius with light and glass and color, which you will talk more about in just a moment. Billy and Koo at Mocha's Nest, I can't wait to hear where this comes from. They've got a good story already. Just a few brief words about our speakers before they share a conversation about the work. Mia and Larry have collaborated before on the Whitney Biennial in 2017 in New York City, a series of work that is evocative of what we see here. So this is a really nice treat to have them together again. Briefly, for those of you who don't know about Larry Bell, he was born in Chicago and lives and works between Taos, New Mexico, and here in Venice, California. He attended Chouinard Art School from 1957 to 59, where he studied under Robert Irwin. He is best known for his refined surface treatment of glass and explorations of light, reflection, and shadow through that material. And he was an influential and essential member of the California Light and Space movement of the 1960s. Some of his most notable solo exhibitions, and I cannot list all of them or we would be here all night, include Larry Bell Time Machines, the first comprehensive American Museum survey of his work in nearly 2 decades at the ICA in Miami. From the 1960s at Hauser and Wirth, New York. In 2016, also Hauser and Wirth, thank you for your support. Also, 6x6, an improvisation at Chinati Foundation in Marfa, Texas. The Denver Museum of Art. Again, the Whitney Biennial in 2017. Phenomenal, which is part of Pacific Standard Time in 2012 at the Contemporary Art Museum in San Diego, and 11 Los Angeles artists in the Hayward Gallery, London, and a really important show that we as curators study often, Primary Structures, at the Jewish Museum in New York in 1966. As for Mia Locks, she is Senior Curator and Head of New Initiatives here at MOCA. Prior to this, Locks was an independent curator and a 2018 fellow at the Center for Curatorial Leadership in New York. She has organized numerous exhibitions, including the 2017 Whitney Biennial, Greater New York, Math Bass Off the Clock, The Little Things Could Be Dearer, and Samara Golden, The Flat Side of the Knife, both in 2014. She's currently organizing an incredible show with artist Tala Madani that will be forthcoming at MOCA next fall. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Larry Bell and Mia Locks.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here. That was a nice introduction.
Yeah, it was. It was wonderful.
So I'm Mia, as Amanda gave a very nice introduction to both of us, and I'm really, really thrilled to be here tonight with legendary artist Larry Bell. Sorry, is that better? I'm getting some signs from the back. Okay. And Larry and I first met Larry on a trip to Taos, New Mexico, which is, where he lives most of the year. And I'd have 2 takeaways from that trip, 2 facts that I kind of brought with me after that trip that have stayed with me, that I'll share with you before I ask Larry a few questions. The first is that I had never been to Taos before. I spent the day with Larry looking at the work and talking about all of the important sort of historical movements, right? I mean, you always hear Larry Bell in the same breath with light and space, minimalism. But one of my takeaways was that there was actually something more happening with the work, and in particular with the more recent work, like the work behind us. I felt like there's something more at play. So that was takeaway number 1. We can come back to that thought. Takeaway number 2 is that Larry is basically a mad scientist. For people that don't know, he, and I think I'm getting this right, literally is controlling the wavelengths of evaporated materials. Am I right? I have that right?
Sort of controlling.
Sort of controlling them. He has a giant vacuum chamber in his studio, which, if you haven't seen one, which I had never seen, is an enormous piece of machinery, which I, again, didn't know. You know, you think in this minimalist way, you think his studio must be this clean, empty cube, but it's not. He's a mad scientist. So that was my second takeaway. I wanted to start, honestly, with the title, which came up earlier, and a couple people have asked me about even just in the last few minutes while we've been gathering. So I thought I would start with that. First, Larry, could you tell us, remind us what the title of the work is and tell us where it comes from? I think that's a nice starting anecdote.
Well, the title is Bill and Coo in MOCA's Nest. And Bill and Coo was a movie I saw when I was about 8 years old, and it starred a bunch of parakeets, and it was a complete story, but all of the actors were birds, and it was sort of a Western, and
has anyone seen this film? Show of hands. Anyone?
well, you can
Okay.
you can Google it up. Bill and Coo is the name of the film.
I'm sure it's
and
on YouTube.
In fact, when after we put the piece up, for some reason I thought of that movie, which I hadn't thought of in 73 years probably, and Bill and Coo, that's what its title is.
So by extension, we're sort of sitting. MOCA is the nest for the artwork, then.
MOCA is the
architecturally.
nest.
Okay.
Right. Anyways, titles for my work usually come from the very first thing that crosses my mind when I see the piece finished, and usually it's something that is stuck to the piece that I can always remember that title, what it looks like. And so I'll not forget what Bill and Coo in MOCA's Nest looks like.
I love that story.
You can see the film. You can call it up on one of those.
YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube. Yeah, it's great.
I think everyone's going to go home and watch that film. Second question I had for you, which relates to my note about the mad scientist. I have to ask you about the process, as I feel like it's not always immediately apparent to people. And there's a few ways you could talk about it, but I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about what goes into making these kind of from start to finish, because it's not straightforward. It's not as straightforward as you might think.
Well, are you talking about the equipment in the studio and what it means to this piece, or?
Both, all of it, any of
Okay.
those.
Well, this sculpture is made of laminated glass that the film that holds two pieces of clear glass together in the case of each of these squares is the color you see. That's the transmitted light is affected by the thin layer of some kind of plastic that holds this together. It's not so different than the glass in your car, except that glass is usually tempered, so when it breaks in tiny little pieces, but it holds together. This would hold together, but it wouldn't break into tiny little pieces. So the material suits me right now, that I can go and select whatever kind of color I want and make something out of a material that I'm familiar with and use the characteristics that the material has, and be expansive with the way the saturated light mixes. And the next phase in the development of this work is where we're going to apply thin metal films to these sculptures and neutralize some of the brilliance of the color, but enhance the saturation with a neutral film. And I'm very excited about that. So each of these uses of this glass is convenient. I can get the material easily, and we can have it fabricated to our dimensions and so on. And I can experiment with it by just looking at it, and from different angles at different lights, different times of day, and sometimes in interiors where you can control the lights completely. They do a lot of interesting things. So I enjoy the work. I enjoy looking at it. I enjoy laying them out, and I enjoy the fabrication process because it's not very backbreaking as it used to be when I picked these things up myself. Now I'm too old to do it. And
Decades ago.
Life has gotten a lot easier when my assistants have gotten a lot stronger.
But just to clarify, and some people have asked me this, like, oh, it's sort of this idea of glass, and you can just order the color of glass. But I just want to make sure people understand, he's not choosing a color of glass and like bringing it to. You're actually, and I'm not this is so far from my wheelhouse, but you're actually transmitting or heating up material that can then be adhered to the glass in the vacuum chamber because there's no air. There's some sort of chemistry happening, which I'm trying to point out because I think it's actually interesting. Maybe you can explain it better.
Yeah, well,
what happens in that?
That's a whole nother body of work. These pieces, the colors are provided by a company that makes those kinds of films that hold things together, and they make them at a particular color wavelength. The colors that I think you're discussing are the thin films that I create in that large vacuum chamber that deposit onto the surface. And
talking about the vacuum chamber.
Pardon me?
I was thinking of the vacuum chamber, yes.
Yeah, right. Well, I use that for another kind of sculpture. And for years I worked with the coatings on large pieces of glass and put them together in right angle kind of relationships to either make a box or a wall that was a series of right angles. And what the films did was mix the transmitted light and the reflected light, so that an improbable visual was created by the presence of this material standing in the middle of a floor. There's a lot of things that have to do with the improbable use of this kind of material for sculpture, basically because it breaks. And however, the material has a very long shelf life, essentially over 1 million years. Of course, once you take it off the shelf, all bets are off, and so
don't drop it.
The life of the work is going to depend a great deal on how careful MOCA is in caring for it. And,
Very careful.
And we can all enjoy it at different times of day and different times of year. It's wonderful to be able to come to a place like this where the piece is staged for inspection, and it looks different from every angle, and especially when the sun is just overhead. It's absolutely amazing around there. And then as it gets darker, now Klaus asked me if I would help them light the piece for night, and I excused myself from that job and asked him to do it. And I understand that it looks great, but I have yet to see it with the night lights on. So
you can come back in the evening. It's beautiful in the morning. It's true. The work looks extremely different depending on the time of day.
Yeah, right. It's really amazing.
Depending on if it's reflecting off the building. So I encourage you all to absolutely come back and experience it at different times, because it does feel very different. It kind of vibrates at a different frequency.
I'm sorry, hon, I didn't hear you.
It looks very different in different light. So.
Yes.
And I guess a related question to what you're saying about this material. I mean, so glass, of course, you've been working with now for how many decades? A long time. Why glass as a material over all other materials?
That's a great question, and I can answer it pretty simply. Number one, you can buy it anywhere. And what's that? My water bottle. You can get it anywhere. It's not terribly expensive. It has a long shelf life, and it does one thing that very few other materials do. It reflects light, it absorbs light, and it transmits light all at the same time. And so that's kind of subtle place in your vision that operates between absorbed, saturated, and transmitted is part of the magic of what the material will do and how it mixes. Now, the only thing I know for sure is that it's going to mix, and so everything is a surprise, really. I never really know exactly how anything is going to come out, except that it should be interesting. If it's not interesting, we don't let it out of the studio. So that's... Glass is glass, and I like the use of it. Does that help?
That's great. Should I be opening this up to questions? Is that a cue? No? Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us about thinking about opacities? And I know it's not as apparent right now because there's not light directly on it, but there's different, like these different panels and the different cubes within cubes have different saturations. They're actually different colors with very specific traits, right?
Yeah, each of them has a inherent kind of magic to it. How it's viewed, how the conditions of the light are on it, and how you feel has a lot to do with what it'll mean to you when you look at it. I like the scale of these things because they're sort of human size, and the parts that I work with to make these sculptures are never more. They don't exceed the limits of my physical body. In other words, nothing will be taller than I can jump and touch, or wider than I can reach with both my fingertips. And each panel will not be heavier than I can grunt up an inch or so off of the floor. And so they're related, the parts are related to my physical body. And that's why the scale is what it is. I can jump and touch 8 foot tall. I can reach 6 foot wide. and I can lift 400 pounds.
That is, I think
About
that
an inch.
deserves a round of applause. I think that's, we'll test you now and ask you to know. I'm
What?
just kidding. I'm kidding. I kind of want to leave it there. I feel like the scale, the feel is, perfectly sighted here. It feels so nice to see
I
these
will be
pieces.
so happy if we can just leave it there.
Shelf life for 1,000,000 years, everybody. So I just want to extend a thank you to Larry. Thank you to
Thank
all
you.
of
I
you
hope
for
you all
coming.
enjoy it. Thanks for everything.
Oh,
Thanks for coming.
someone asked a
I'm
question.
just thrilled to see so many wonderful people that I've known for so long.
Enjoy your evening, and Bill and Koo at MOCA's Nest.